Hello friends and welcome to the Qualiverse. I'm Jim Maltese and today we are going to talk about having difficult conversations about project delays due to skipping some quality milestones, right? This often happens when there is a request to shorten the timeline of a project and people start getting creative and they think, what if we skip something? What if we skip the staging? What if we skip the design review to save a little bit of extra time? And we're going to talk about why that's not a good idea, and maybe the conversation that we can have with the client who's making that request. So before we get into that, I recently got into an argument with my wife over something relatively small. It was a very busy week at work, and I had 2 scout leader meetings scheduled back to back immediately after I clocked out for the day. At the first scout meeting, one of the leaders left some forms that I needed to fill out at his house. But since I was going to be running around that evening, I offered to pick them up after my second meeting. It's no big deal, right? I'm out anyway. I thought my wife would be asleep by the time I got home, so not a big deal. I got it. It's covered. So I went to the second meeting, and some of the other leaders and I got to chit-chatting, and it went a little bit longer than I expected, but I called to let my wife know that, this has happened and the second meeting had wrapped, and that I'd be on my way home shortly. But I thought she would be asleep, and as it turned out, she was not asleep at all. And she was getting a little sleepy, and at that point, she sleepily asked if I could pick up some bread on the way home. And here is where I messed up. Because instead of saying that I have to pick something up at Scout Leader number 1's house, I just said, "Sounds great." That's it, sounds great. I didn't want to explain the whole story. It was late. I didn't think picking something up would take too much longer than also getting the bread. And I didn't want to explain why I was going out of my way to pick up something when someone else forgot something. Whatever. I thought it was going to turn into a thing. So instead, I went with "sounds great." Now, I didn't factor in Scout Leader number 1's penchant for telling long stories. And I happen to enjoy the long stories. And like I said, I really thought my wife was going to be asleep at this time. And so, as it turns out, I was wrong. My wife expected me to be home 15 minutes after that phone call. But because of those long stories and picking up the bread, it took closer to 45 minutes. So like I said, mistakes were made and lessons were learned. In trying to avoid a thing by not just taking a little bit of time and explaining the entire scenario, I made it into an even bigger thing. "What took you so long? I thought the worst. Why didn't you let me know?" And she was completely right. Why didn't I let her know? Instead of having a potentially, and really in this case, a barely difficult conversation at the beginning of this whole ordeal, it ended up blowing up in my face. And it was absolutely ridiculous. I see elements of this scenario in AV projects all the time. The project manager or the field engineer, the technician or the engineer avoids a potentially difficult conversation at all costs with the client or another team member, hoping that it won't become a thing, right? We'll just sweep it under the rug. But of course, inevitably, it ends up becoming an even bigger problem later down the line. A great example of this is not fighting for that really important staging time in the process because of scheduling constraints, right? The client wants the schedule pulled in, and so let's skip the staging. It's not that important. Now, I hope we can all agree that staging is a critical project milestone. And this is where the entire system is mocked up in the integrator's shop, firmware compatibility is finalized, racks are thoroughly tested, control code and DSP site files are loaded, each device and internal rack cabling are confirmed functional. And really, it's said that for every hour spent troubleshooting something during staging in the shop, you save 3 hours in the field, the 3-to-1 rule. 1 hour troubleshooting in the shop equals 3 hour doing the same troubleshooting in the field. So in the shop, technicians have access to all the tools they could want or need. There's good, fast internet connection. The team is present. You need to collaborate or brainstorm on something. There are spare computers, spare equipment, spare cables, spare terminations. It's way better to troubleshoot something in the shop and get it out of the way. It's that proverbial 3-to-1 rule. Staging is critical to a project's profitability, delivering the system as efficiently as possible once you're on the client site, as well as maintaining the overall project timeline. It is a critical part of that. So, why is it often the first thing on the chopping block when the timeline is at risk? If the timeline is at risk or the client is asking to bring in the turnover date, it is even more important to perform a thorough staging. We need to have the system configured and working flawlessly in the shop environment where it is the most efficient method of progressing the overall project. If we leave anything to chance in the field, remember that 3-to-1 rule. If there are no issues, the staging costs you an extra hour per system to complete. It's not a deal breaker. If there are issues that, for example, take let's say 4 hours to troubleshoot, that's even better because now you just saved yourself 12 hours of troubleshooting in the field if we can believe that 3-to-1 rule. We need to change the idea that quality assurance processes are wasted time or expendable milestones. They are critical to the success of the project, and they are even more important when the timeline is tight. I hear challenges to this when we are trying to get out small systems. And we said it before, right? The small systems, they take no time at all to stage. They take no time at all to commission. So why don't we do it? There's no margin for error in those small systems. So for the smaller systems, it's even more important to do the quality management system, to make sure the quality assurance milestones are in place and performed with discipline, right? The big systems, I think everyone is on board with, but in my opinion, even more critical for the smaller systems because there's no room for error. Chuck Espinoza, who is an incredible staff instructor from Avixa, always talks about the $90 screw. Imagine being on a job site about to put up a display mount and you realize a bolt is missing. The display can't go up without this bolt, so what happens? Well, you and your partner can't finish putting up the display at the moment. We need that bolt. Productivity is lost. Next, we have to find where we can find that bolt. And of course, it's a very particular bolt, but we're in luck. There is a Home Depot close by, so we take the company van out of the paid parking lot to drive. It may cost a little bit of money because we're taking it out early, and then we got to put it back in. Or worse, we have to walk to Home Depot, maybe get lost in a new city, whatever. 30 minutes later, we find out that, of course, they are out of that particular bolt that we need. So we have to find another store nearby. 90 minutes later, we find out that Lowe's has it, thank goodness, and we're on our way back to the job site. But, of course, being efficient and looking out for the client, our partner is on to another task. And so now we have to wait until they finish up that task at hand, and then we can finally go back to assist with the original display mount. In the end, adding up all that wasted time, the opportunity lost, the shifting of tasks, that 35-cent bolt, right, that we finally found at Lowe's, 35 cents at Lowe's, ends up costing the company $90 or more. This is the cost of poor quality. And so what I'll say to Chuck is I'll see your $90 screw and I'm going to raise you the $1,000 firmware upgrade. So we've all been there, right? You get to a job site and realize you need to upgrade or downgrade the firmware of a device. Now at the shop, this wouldn't be a problem. Just download the file on the company's high-speed network, pull a spare laptop from stock, set that thing up with the device and have it load firmware while you're taking your laptop and off doing other things for the project. Very efficient, very fast, very quick. No big deal. However, if you're in the field, now it's an entirely different story. You only have one laptop, right? Who's bringing 2 or 3? Well, I've heard of people bringing 2 or 3 laptops, but my back can't handle that. So in the field, you only have one laptop. And of course, you're not allowed on the client's network for cybersecurity concerns. So you are forced to download the however many gigabyte firmware on a cellular hotspot. And you find that if you attempt to do other things while it's downloading, it slows down the file transfer speed or it interrupts it. Oh my God, now I have to download it again. And this takes an hour or 2 to download a file. It is infuriating. And then of course, you find out that your hotspot is in roaming mode, of course, and you accidentally go over your allotted monthly bandwidth allowance. Oh my God. Now, next month's cell phone bill is going to be a doozy, because why would anyone attempt to download a 4 GB file twice, because the first time was interrupted, and so it's a thing. Then you have to load the firmware to the device, which is even more finicky than trying to download it. Needless to say, your only available laptop has to be dedicated to loading firmware to the device, leaving you completely in a lurch, right? What can we do without a laptop nowadays? So all we can do is babysit the laptop, watching the progress bar tick by as slowly as ever, all the way to 100%, right? It's like watching paint dry. And so what would have taken you an hour back at the shop has now taken you 4 hours in the field, 4 infuriating hours. So not only that, we lost productivity because we only had one laptop and we were stuck in the water during the entire process. So we weren't able to progress on anything else, and it took us way longer in the field. Time in the field, plus lost opportunity time, plus the cellular charges for the multiple long downloads can easily put the cost of upgrading firmware to a device in the field at over $1,000. It's ridiculous. Again, this is the cost of poor quality, and who has time for that? And what does all this mean to the client? It's all well and good to talk about how this hurts the integrator and it takes extra time, but how does it affect the technology manager? And I said it right there, right? All this takes time. It takes extra time in the field if systems are shipped out prematurely, that is, without being staged. The client may think that if they push for getting the system on site early, it's going to mean the room gets turned over early. But this is usually not the case. And don't get me wrong, I've seen installation teams work miracles, but miracles for that first use, right? We can expedite being able to get a laptop on the screen in a very short amount of time. That's easy. That's kid stuff. But the system isn't complete, right? Just that first use. The laptop image will look great on the display, 100%, and they can have their presentation, and we can get by that first use. But we still need to balance the audio system. We need to confirm the conferencing system is working. We need to complete the network schedule. We need to ring out speech reinforcement system. We need to upgrade the firmware on the mixer to get rid of the hiccup and find that $90 inch and 3/4 M8 bolt for the conference monitor. Not that this has happened to me before, but it has. The laptop might be on the display for that first use, but we still have a long way to go before the system is complete. And it's going to take the integrator 3 times as long to complete all this as we ship to the site early. It's going to take 3 times as long to install the system because we didn't stage it in the shop. So this leads us to that saying, which sometimes you need to slow down to speed up. Skipping staging is going to hurt the overall progress of the project because it is so critical to getting installs done quickly. Now, clients deal with bad news way better than surprises. If a client is requesting a system which has not been properly staged be delivered immediately to the job site, the risks of this request should be carefully laid out to them. But do so by putting yourself in their shoes. They are most likely under insane amounts of pressure, right? And they just want this thing done as quickly as possible. They need it done sooner. So they are thinking that if the system arrives on site sooner, maybe the installation will be completed sooner. But this is typically not the case at all. It's counterintuitive, but it's not the case. At the time of that request, it would be in our best interest and really in their best interest to point out that, number one, our internationally reviewed quality management system is in place to assure they get their systems delivered complete and as efficiently as possible. We should also point out that delivering their system with a proper staging and thereby, we should also point out that delivering the system without a proper staging and thereby skipping a critical quality assurance milestone will more likely, counterintuitively, but more than likely increase the overall installation time of the project. And additionally, we should point out that if any issues pop up on site, and they always do, troubleshooting those issues in their room on site is going to take 3 times as long as troubleshooting them in our shop. So if the importance of the staging milestone is laid out along these lines, many clients will realize what they're asking for is penny wise but pound foolish. It might not be the most comfortable conversation to have with a client, but it is much better than surprising them with a new turnover date 2 weeks past the original deadline. So I would encourage you to be forthright and transparent with your clients. Never delay delivering difficult news or hide facts. And then once the Band-Aid is ripped off, right, once we're having the conversation, explain the positives of taking this approach and why it will ultimately benefit them and their users. Okay, I only wish that I had followed my own advice with my wife. I would have avoided having the covers viciously, but a little playfully stolen from me at 2 a.m. for avoiding a simple conversation about picking up some merit badge blue cards. It's always better to just have the conversation. Difficult or not, it is always better to have the conversation. All right. And that is this month's Qualiverse. I hope you enjoyed it. Please reach out to me with any questions or anything else you'd like to see, and have an AV day.